inside everything.
All right, welcome back to another episode of The Strategy Inside Everything. This is a big day. We have been putting this off between snowstorms and traveling and losing voices and all kinds of craziness over the past couple of weeks. I'm very excited to have today's guest, Ana Milicevic. Ana, how did I do in pronouncing your name?
You did very well, Adam. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Well, if you don't know already, you are about to know that Ana is quite brilliant. She is the founder of Sparrow Advisors. I have been, as most of the guests, I have been connected with Ana through Twitter. The power and wonder of my favorite tool. I'm a shareholder. I have to tell you that. I have to disclose that. So I got a chance to invite her, and luckily for me and for all of you listening, she agreed to come on, and we have a fun topic that we're going to get into. Before we do, Ana, would you please tell people who don't know you, and even people like me who do know you, a little bit about your background and where you've been and who you are, just so that they can get up to speed, and then we'll get running.
Hey, everybody. So if you don't know me from Twitter, my name's Ana Milicevic. And I'm not for some reason, I'm not a Twitter shareholder. I probably should be saying how, yes, I know. I do spend a fair amount of time pontificating there. But I'm the founder of Sparrow Advisors, and we're a management consultancy that focuses on the intersection of advertising and marketing technology and all of the adjacent categories and industries such as e-commerce and pretty much anything that touches digital interactions is something that we cover. And it's a kind of a company that's been forming for a long time because in my track record in operational roles across media, entertainment, technology companies, and advertising all over the years, I've always kind of wanted to have a very dedicated management consultancy that I could summon to come and help me with strategy, which product lines should we be investing in, how do we take something to market in a specific market, whether here in the US or globally, and then how to kind of support my staff without having to hire a whole team of people who wouldn't really be utilized full-time or didn't really have the right expertise. So about 3 years ago, I built or started building a consultancy built by operators for other operators. And so we're kind of the neutral team that you would bring on board whenever you have any type of really gnarly problem that you want to solve.
And that's interesting. And you started, it sounds like you've worked in a lot of different types of environments, entertainment and marketing, both?
Yes. So I started my career as a computer scientist.
Oh, man, so you've seen it all.
Yeah. So I started, and I've always kind of been on the intersection of more than one discipline. So my first venture when I was still in college was a kind of a very accidental software development company where, I was the founder, one of the engineers, but I also very quickly realized that there's this whole other business side that I seem to be able to straddle, but not a lot of people did. So I've mostly kind of stumbled into these very multifaceted roles throughout my career. And I got into product management before that was really an established discipline, and have shifted from industry to industry from my perspective fairly seamlessly. But if you were kind of going to look at my experience, you'd probably kind of go, wow, you've tackled, the music industry and other parts of media and entertainment, and then really high tech and all these really, really large software conglomerates. And there's an undercurrent there that ties it all together. And that's some type of advertising or marketing related concept. So yeah, I've seen it all.
Yeah, no, it sounds like it. And that's why today's topic is going to be engaging. So today we're going to be talking about the future of work, and then kind of planning for that future where we don't know a lot of things that'll be coming down the pike. I don't usually talk about myself on this show, but just for point of conversation, to provide context for listeners and Ana, even for you. Right now I'm at a small agency here. It's called Santee. We're based in Phoenix, but I have worked at JWT in New York, which was the biggest ad agency at the time in the world, the biggest office, and I've worked at in-house at Verizon. So I've seen the entire scale of agencies and everything from the smallest to the biggest in 4 or 5 different markets. So I've kind of seen a lot of stuff and seen what works and what doesn't, and how things change, and how agencies can get swallowed by change, or companies can get swallowed by change.
Yeah, that's awesome, because it's amazing to me how different your experience can be, even within the same industry, depending on the stage of company that you're at. So if if you specialize in really early stage startups, that's very different than being at a 500 plus person company. And I don't think that we really realize how different it is unless you've been in all of those roles. I have seen it firsthand how challenging it can be for people who've had tremendous careers at one type of company. They're driven by a desire to try something different. They move to a company of different size, and then all of a sudden they're not supported. They can't really catch their bearings quickly enough. It usually happens when folks go from really large companies to startups, but I've seen it happen the other way around more often than not too.
I have witnessed people coming from big, well-supported, high structure organizations going to the startup or the smaller model and just losing their mind.
Yep.
when they don't know who, I have to do my own expense report. I don't even understand how to get started here.
Yeah. And it's always something that seems so trivial like that really, really trips people up.
It does. It gets in the psyche, I think.
Mm-hmm. But
let's talk a little bit. How have you seen, since you started Sparrow Advisors, since you said 3 years ago, so how have you seen work change, and you found a space there that didn't exist before for your company to exist? So what's changed, or what are you seeing as a trend?
Yeah, so we, when we first started out, we were really testing out this theory that this type of expertise that we bring to the table, which is really, hey, we've seen every company size across multiple different industries. We can put together essentially a senior executive team for hire that you can task with really complex things, and we'll work alongside your team, and we will transition our knowledge to your team as you go along. And this, our hypothesis was that this was going to be a great model for young and old companies alike. And I'm happy to say that 3 years in, that seems to have been the right hypothesis to make. Because for younger companies, usually somebody around Series A or thereabouts, it's a tremendous advantage to be able to come with a really, a team that's put together that can just start executing from day one and has the right industry knowledge, and then teach and train your team that usually consists of more junior employees who need to make a leap. But because you're in this high growth mode, you don't necessarily have the time or the effort to really put any mentorship efforts together or any training or any of that. And then for larger companies, it's similar because we can kind of work entirely independently of any existing structures and really plug into what they already have. And so we initially set off thinking this is what the market needs. We think that the market has proven us now that this is exactly what is needed. But the bigger shift that we've observed, not just over the last 3 years that Sparrow has been around, but I'd say probably for the better part of the last decade, as my partner and I were in senior operational roles across sales, services, product, and in a variety of different companies, is that things happen in cycles and spurts in companies. And so,
yeah, for sure.
So you do need a more flexible and fluid way of accessing really stellar expertise for shorter periods of time. And, I use concepts like flow a lot. And, so if you're operating at a certain flow as a company, That doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have every skill in-house or have to try to build every skill in-house. And at the same time, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to open a full-time role for everything you possibly need. And so the biggest shift that we've seen is that companies started or are starting to here in the US and in other regions of the world, they're maybe a little bit ahead of the curve, is thinking about how to be more fluid about not just their internal resourcing, but how they kind of form around executing a project. We picked management consulting and strategy consulting as one of the most traditional disciplines here, where you'll typically have a stable of folks who are quite expensive to not have working on projects all the time, but tends to have a pretty generalist outlook and don't really go very deep on certain topics. And we kind of wanted to flip that around for the 21st century and instead construct a looser network of really, really high caliber experts who don't necessarily want to come and work full time on a particular company's problem, but want to solve that type of problem many, many times over.
So it's you're seeing a kind of a skeleton. The org chart turned into a skeleton of generalists, and then they recruit people that are the experts or the specialists in key areas that want to work on the types of problems they want to solve, or they enjoy solving, or they're the best at solving, and just coming in and they're willing to be that freelancer and solve that problem short term or long term as an outsider.
Yeah, I think that's where we're going directionally, and it'll every industry will take a slightly different timeline to get there. But when you look at how quickly things like the gig economy kind of came out of almost nowhere, but how quickly they were adopted, there's this desire for on-demand services and quality on-demand expertise.
Yes.
That's very different to how companies, especially larger companies, budget for roles today, how they think about their organizations, how they think about how many people they will need to execute a particular project. And so on the one hand side, we have something that's very rigid and very kind of almost old school now in its structure. And then on this other hand side, we have everything from being able to summon a car when you're standing on a street corner somewhere on your mobile phone, or ordering food via Grubhub or Seamless or whatever. And these types of experiences are permeating all parts of our life, except seemingly the traditional workplace relationships environment, et cetera, and where we still see that kind of monolithic thinking.
How do you think something like I don't like the phrase the gig economy because
I hate it. I hate it. Can we come up with a better name for it?
Well, so the gig economy has become a brand.
Yes.
It's become a terrible brand. And so the perception when you say the gig economy, I go to TaskRabbit and all these places where I feel that lower wage workers are being exploited to a certain extent.
Yes.
But that's not the vision. You're not talking about that.
No. And I'm glad you brought that up because I've been struggling with that term. I absolutely hate it. I think it instantly devalues.
Yes, 100%.
Yeah, it devalues flexibility of work and the ability to kind of say, hey, I'm really an expert in this particular area. This is the part of work that I enjoy the most, and I want to focus on that, as opposed to, identifying yourself by the company you work with. You could think about, hey, this is what I want to work on. And, it's interesting that whenever there's a huge shift in needs, it seems like some of the first folks to take advantage of it are kind of operating in the gray area. Like Mechanical Turk was great when it came up, and it was very useful for a lot of very manual tasks that there was really no easy way of solving before. until we realized that it's basically being used as an alternative to minimum wage jobs. And in areas where there simply are no jobs here in the US, folks are working for like $2 an hour. Something that, that really we shouldn't be okay with that as a society. And then, companies like Fiverr, for example, who are advocating, $5 design. Like nobody in their right mind should say, I'm going to spend $5 on design. Like that's no.
Or I guess the question on it is, if you spend $5 on it, is it still design?
Yeah, exactly. Like it's not, there's a reason why you pay $5 for something as opposed to, a slightly more reasonable price, but it feels almost predatory at this stage, and really it's an end run around companies no longer want to provide the level of benefits and services that they used to before. So they're doing a runaround around it with this gig economy. It's great. Everybody wants the gig economy. Well, the reason people are receptive to the gig economy is really twofold. One is, for some people, flexibility at work is much more important than, hey, I have a full-time job. And there's a really, really large population of folks who are in this group. And then the other is just out of necessity. It's people who would want to work full-time, but they're not able to find the right kind of job.
What do you think? Who do you think then? So we're transitioning from. I have a feeling you agree with me that the gig economy will evolve as that kind of predatory and a little bit of desperation gives way to whatever phase 2 of gig economy is.
Yes.
But the future of work, where we're talking about experts employing education or experience, who will qualify for that? I mean, I see it a fair deal already in the marketing world, where I have, I need help with a very specific type of paid social campaign. I know a person who's an expert in doing those types of things. I can bring them in. How do you see this transitioning into the future that you're thinking of?
Yeah, so it's exactly that. And I think in the US, we're a little bit behind the curve, mostly because, because it's hard to be an independent worker here because there's no health insurance, and it's not easy to get some of the basic benefits that other countries provide. When you look at Europe, for example, job sharing, the idea of two people working in the same essentially full-time role, but backing each other up and providing for a seamless transition, let's say from maternity leave back into the working world or similar. This has been in place for a really long time, and it's easier to have that amount of flexibility when you don't have to worry if you get a cold whether you're going to essentially go bankrupt because you have no access to healthcare. And I think that what we're working on now, and if we had this, if we were recording about 2 months from now, I'd be able to tell you about this platform that we're building. But we're starting to work on just that. It's how do you connect? First of all, how do you build a network of highly qualified, vetted, and extremely capable people who are wanting to work on other projects? And then how do you create a marketplace where companies can also find folks like that? Right now, it's usually word of mouth, and it depends on your personal network and how you structure that. But as a freelancer or as a wannabe specialist for hire, it's really hard to get started. You have to invest a lot of time in relationships and getting that off the ground. So we envision facilitating. When I say we, I mean Sparrow. We envision facilitating and really productizing these networks of high quality people. And then working with the other side of this coin is really working with employers on getting them to think more along the lines of, well, I should really be paying, this person for 3 months of work what I would normally budget for maybe an entire year in this role, but I won't need this type of expertise for a whole year, or that kind of calculation is still, we find, really lagging in the US. So I think that every person who's even remotely entrepreneurial and very good at a particular specialist area, that this is their future, and that this is how they will think about work within the next 5 years, probably. As opposed to, honing your or solving the same problem in the same company for a really long time. I think we're going to see a lot more fluidity, and in many ways very similar to how accountants or fractional chief financial officers operate today, where you have a skill set that's applicable across a vast number of companies, and it really you just need to be connected to the right companies that need your expertise at the right time.
And you brought up a critical point about why this is all lagging here in the U.S., which is benefits, healthcare specifically. But if it's an extra 15 to 25% of a salary that goes to paying a full-time employee those benefits in a lot of cases here in the U.S., just the cost of infrastructure is ridiculous.
Yeah.
So how have you seen that be addressed? I know different nations in Europe have their own, open healthcare or universal healthcare or whatever. How do you think it'll be addressed here in the U.S. based on what you've seen elsewhere?
Well, I do hope that we'll have a nationwide solution for healthcare pretty soon, but it's in reality, it's going to take at best a couple of years. I think for the interim, I'm hoping that more states and insurance companies will make it a lot easier to sign up for the types of benefits that large companies provide. But if you're a one person shop or so, it's something that we've considered also when we think about our platform, whether we want to take on as a provider of benefits as well. And we'll cross that bridge, or we'll have to cross that bridge pretty soon. But I think the best way to handle it short term would just be to factor that into whatever hourly, weekly, monthly rate the freelance experts want to set for themselves. That is still going to be overall smarter than just economically speaking for companies to cover than any other method that we currently have. But it really is a really, really big headache. And I think it's preventing a lot of people from being more open about their flexibility needs, about, there are a lot of folks today who clock into the office and, do the usual 9 to 5, especially in very creative industries like ours. When you think about advertising creatives, it's mind-boggling to me that there are requirements to show up at like 9 a.m. in agencies. That just seems so counterproductive, because if there's one portion of human work that really can't be forced, it's creativity. And so requiring that somebody be physically present at a certain date and time in a certain place is really not doing much to foster what these folks are meant to be working on.
We've only been doing this for 100 years. I guess we'll get it in the next 150 years eventually, right?
Exactly. I hope we've kind of learned our lesson, and we can deconstruct.
We know that we haven't.
But, a girl can dream.
Yeah, we'll see how it changes with everything going on at WPP and the P&G begging for 75% of workforce to be creative inside the agencies. We'll see how it all changes.
Yes, it's interesting that it's this is such a fascinating time for so many different things, but we're still operating in a fairly, I would consider, outdated system. So this structured approach to work, and then there are these economic drivers that are starting to push folks in different directions, like that P&G ask, or now the WPP post, Sir Martin Sorrell, and we're going to be looking at a lot of restructuring, and I hope that somewhere at the nexus of all of that restructuring, we really get to reevaluate what work physically means. And by that, I mean, hey, do you really need to live in one of the major markets to be successful in advertising? Now, since you and I are on this podcast, I think you've certainly proven that, no, you can be based in other places. And I think from my work as well, I happen to live in New York. It makes a lot of things easier, but a lot of our clients are somewhere else. So being on a plane, traveling, being on video conference all the time, these are things that by now should be normal. We also, do we really need the 9 to 5? We have clients that are across multiple time zones. And if we stuck to 9 to 5, we would never be able to talk to some of them because they're not.
No kidding.
Yeah. So there's if we build in flexibility at the system now, and I know this is going to be very challenging, going from very rigid, regimented system to a flexible and loose one. It's in the short term, it's going to be a pretty big adjustment for a lot of folks, but I think it's kind of easier if we start now, or really, ideally a few years ago we would have started this, but this is really the only way we'll be able to approach future work, and work that is not very cookie cutter and clearly defined. This goes back to our earlier conversation about generalists versus specialists, and how that equation is going to change.
Well, yeah, and I think problems are going to get more specific and unique. Mm-hmm. So we'll have less stamped out, repeatable assignments in a lot of cases. But I do have a question. Mm-hmm. So if this is where it's going, I was pretty fortunate, and I suspect you were too, to have some mentors that gave me time and pointed me in directions and answered my dumb questions when I was really young in this business, or when I was still in school. If those specialists are not present within the organization, who will mentor young people, or not even necessarily young people, but inexperienced people that are looking to get that training or additional help? How have you seen any successful modeling of that kind of mentorship, or is it all happening as an extracurricular?
I think at the moment it's all happening as an extracurricular, and I say this because I think I've been very fortunate in my career to have stumbled upon the right kinds of people, and have stumbled upon folks who would support this flexibility even before I could articulate what it really was. And so I think now when you think about how people form their mentorship teams, it's not necessarily somebody from the company that you're working at today. It's more of a personal board kind of concept, which is something that I've talked about quite a few times, actually, that I, again, accidentally stumbled upon fairly early on in my career, but has proven to be a really transformative type of setup. So basically, at any given time, you pick 5 to 8 people who are very close to you, some family, some friends, some professional acquaintances, peers, etc., and you consult them on or consult with them on big professional decisions, personal decisions, just like a corporate board. Like once a quarter, you kind of run through some things with this group of people. And like with corporate boards, the group of people can change over time, and you don't want to have all family or, one group over indexing others. You kind of want to have this overall feedback. And so I think structures like that are going to prove to be that type of mentorship network that folks need. And because it's easier than ever to reach out to people online, I'd ideally like to see folks try to structure those kinds of mentorship groupings. Don't have a really good word for it other than board. It's like mentorship grouping or whatever.
No, it's a great concept. That's a place where regional proximity can be negative. Being in a place like New York, or somewhere, a bigger market or a more condensed market, I guess, being out here in Arizona can be challenging just because there are fewer of the people doing what I'm trying to do than you have in the East Coast and most of those major markets or even LA. So that's a challenge I think individuals will see. But I want to ask you about the flip side of that. So we've worked out a model where I can go and a combination of in-person and digital advisory board that I build, which I love that idea of the board. What does it mean for a company though? If I'm starting a company, you started Sparrow and you want to build that. So 20 years from now, what does it mean that internally a company wouldn't be mentoring people necessarily? Will that mean more people changing jobs and leaving jobs, less, more fluidity and less long-term, even less long-term employees? Or how do you see that working?
I think the concept of how we value length of employment needs to change too. So I don't think there's necessarily a correlation between length of employment and really anything, because again, looking at U.S. companies in particular, and just anecdotally looking at my own network, I know a lot of people who would have jumped ship or left to other jobs, but they're shackled by all healthcare and similar things that we talked about, or they're just they're stimulated enough in their current roles not to kind of rock the boat, but want to spend extra time working on themselves, working on other projects, etc. So I think that how somebody perceives work in general is very individual. What I like to focus on throughout all of my companies and all of the teams I've built over the years is, for me, flexibility is really religion. And whatever that means to each individual person, for some folks, it might be, hey, I need to, finish my work every day at 3, I'll log in again at 8 p.m. after I've put my kids to bed, but I need that time to focus on other things. Or it might be, hey, I want to work on a new project every quarter. I want to work with a new client. I want to work in a new region. I want to expand my horizons. And I think in the future, companies that are able to understand better what motivates each person that they're employing, as opposed to assuming that everybody wants to, be promoted every 2 years, get a title bump and things like that. Those are going to be the companies that are going to ultimately win. And that goes back to the whole destructuring of how we think about work today. I think we assume that everybody wants the same kinds of outcomes from work. And I think there are a lot of people who are very happy with having stable employment and not necessarily thinking about changing roles or changing industries or changing professions. But there's also a really, really significant group of folks who think about work differently. And there's really no company model that matches that today, and not to mention the gig economy again. but that's
let's not go down there.
But
it's gotten a black eye, but I don't think it applies to the people that we're talking about.
This is driving me nuts because I have been trying to come up with a better name for it. And so as of late, we've been calling it like the high-end gig economy, which is somehow even worse than just gig economy. So it's really, this is the thing that's been keeping me up at nights now. It needs a better name. It really needs a better brand, because it's not really doing justice to how empowering it can be, how creative it can be, and how how much of a better outcome we can get if we're able to transition to this new method of work.
Well, yeah. Also, it's the black eye hasn't been given to the economy part of that phrase. It's been given to the gig part. And so, knowledge work is typically not thought of as a gig.
Yes, it's not. But when you look at companies and how they think about bringing in part-time talent, there's very little distinction today in between that. It's like, oh, we need this person to do this one thing, as opposed to we would need this type of person with these kinds of skill sets that could help with, these 4 or 7 or 10 or however many different things. The most difficult thing today for a freelancer for working for a large company is to, when you're working in one department, to go and do that same thing for a different department or a different office. And it really shouldn't be that way. Yeah.
I think you're right. Of having lived that.
Yes. Another big driver around rethinking work. Well, there's really 2 huge drivers that have inspired a lot of our thinking and efforts around this. Is, we see this in our daily engagements with clients. It is that flexibility in transitioning. Like, for example, hey, we are going to have a senior leader who's about to go on maternity leave. Like, are we going to need to pause these 3 or 4 projects? And you kind of go, well, no, that's a really temporary state. Well, what happens if the person doesn't come back from maternity leave? Well, then that's a different story. Why wouldn't they? They're a senior leader. They're really good at their job, and so that kind of kicks off 2 different kinds of conversations. One is, well, are you able to support people as an organization who are going through life changes? And that then goes into, well, wait a minute, we have in the US, we're about to have the largest generation of folks who are about to retire, or they're going to reach retirement age, but not necessarily want to retire, especially if they're knowledge workers. What are we going to do with them? We don't really have an easy way to, there's no marketplace where you can go and find somebody who's spent, 30 years as a senior executive, who now has extra time on their hands or whatnot. So we've been thinking of these transitions, whether it's usually with women, it's usually around maternity, and we've seen so much research around the pay discrepancy between men and women, and how having children negatively impacts women from an earning perspective, as opposed to it's really beneficial for men. So, can more flexibility help with that? Thinking of retirees, we're thinking of people who are interested in changing verticals. So this is the other thing that's really interesting from how structured our work lives are. If you want to go from, let's say, advertising into e-commerce, those 2 industries are very similar, and it's very easy to transition from one to another, or I should say it should be. But if you are looking to, like, if you're mid-career and you're looking to switch from one industry to another, it's not so easy. And even within advertising, if you've spent most of your career on the buy side, and you want to see kind of what it's like on the sell side, or you want to go and be an executive at a brand, for example. It's not how we think about somebody's capabilities and what they bring to the table. If you're running one type of company, you kind of want to hire people who've had experience with just that type of company, and that's, in today's world, that's pretty myopic. We are going through so much transition that people who've colored a little bit outside of the lines are, I think, much better predisposed to be successful in this coming economy and today's economy as well.
That's the kind of thinking you need to bring in, is not somebody who solved that exact thing before, but somebody who's got a different perspective than the rest of the organization. That is the static.
Exactly, and you've hit the nail on the head. And then as companies, we still think of, oh, this is the problem I have. Let me find somebody who's solved exactly that problem. The problem is that by the time that person starts, you're no longer solving that particular problem because that problem has evolved. And this is the reality of the pace of change that we're seeing, and the reality of a very digital first world. So if you're hiring a vice president, it's going to take you 6 to 9 months to find somebody, and then it's going to take them another month and a half to start, and then the usual 90 days for them to ramp up. So we're talking about a year.
Right.
So what problem in today's world stays exactly the same for a whole year? I can't think of many or any really. So there's that fluidity is here already. We're just not really equipped to deal with it readily. And that's the problem that we see at current clients, and the problem that we hope to solve moving forward.
Wow, that's awesome. I'm really glad that I think that's a perfect place to end. And I'm really glad you just got to that point. That's a very big exclamation point for me. What problem will still remain the same in a year?
Yeah, if you find one, let me know. I'm really curious. I don't think there are.
Jesus, what'll remain the same in a week?
Yes, I think. Well, just look at the last week that we've had in advertising, right? I mean, this weekend has. With Sir Martin Sorrell again resigning, this is going to have a tremendous impact on not just the structure of WPP, but possibly how we think about holding companies. And it's giving everybody, a new kind of newfound lease on rethinking how we're going to market here. And then, a few days before that, we had the Facebook hearings, and GDPR is coming in a few weeks. Like, nothing about this is static, except the way companies think about tackling it is pretty static. And, anybody who now builds like an 18-month plan has to be ready to reevaluate that plan, if not every quarter, then certainly every 6 months. And that's the reality of it.
Even quarterly seems hard to lock onto.
Yes. And that's where we're seeing a lot of friction, because you need to come up with a new way of planning that can account both for short-term, medium-term, and long-term. And, this is maybe a little bit self-serving, but I think folks who've had a product management background and have put things on roadmaps have an advantage here, because this is exactly the kind of challenge that you would solve regularly and many times over. But that's not really something that's used in financial planning as a discipline, like corporate financial planning or budgeting. So that's right. Interesting. And that's how we get these newer disciplines that are kind of cross-cutting and covering a couple of different areas.
I love it. Well, you know what? I think I would love, you hinted at something that you'll be releasing soon, which maybe we'll have to do a sequel to this, because I have a feeling you and I could talk about this for another hour.
Yes, probably easily. but let's leave it for part 2. It'll be much more exciting then. We'll have a show and tell.
Absolutely. We'll set up the sequel for sure. Well, Ana, tell people where they can find you.
Well, you can find me on Twitter as AEXM. That's the easiest way to get in touch with me. And barring that, please come to hellosparrow.com, and you can read more about our advisory business, Sparrow Advisors, and fairly soon you'll be able to see this new thing that we're cooking up for the future of work.
I will be checking back frequently to see that for sure. Ana, I thank you again for making time and for playing scheduling with me. I know we had some starts and stops.
We did, but I'm very glad we connected. This was a lot of fun, and I'm very jealous. It's a really rainy, miserable day today in the Northeast, and I'm hoping we get spring sometime pretty soon, finally.
We actually have a cloud here in Scottsdale, so I feel terrible as well.
Well,
I'll leave you with that.
Thank you.
All right, excellent. Thank you again.
Thanks.